Mikey the merchant trudged through the muddy scrub. The rain had stopped and there was just a hint of orange morning light beginning to creep into his awareness. He switched off his torch and stopped to catch his breath. The ghoul turned and leant heavily on his knees, panting slightly. "Ah, you bastard," he muttered to himself and looked up at the silhouette of the tank. Just a straight, black shape in the morning glow as the sun squeezed its rays through the subtle but permanent radiation smog on the horizon behind it. He hoped he wasn't too late. He hoped he could do something about this mess, and he hoped to hell that he could get as far away from Keshar as possible before... well... He checked his scribbled napkin map. "Well, nothing for it but 4 toes in front of 3, eh, Mick?" He chuckled to himself, and pushed on.
Hello, everybody. How are y'all? This is yours truly, Alan Freed. Get your dancing shoes on and welcome to the Camel Rock and Roll Dance Party.
Hello and welcome back to A Wasteland Story. In the last episode of the show, we left our heroine and her damp companion absolutely no steps closer to solving the mystery of what on earth is going on Keshar. But, deciding to solve that problem with Mikey's infamous moonshine, she doesn't much care at the moment. Inadvisedly, instead of hitting the hay with a paracetamol and some electrolytes, the narrator is not a doctor, do not take medical advice from the narrator, she decides it might be fun to go and see what all the kerfuffle is about over at the trading post, and perhaps find some answers as to why people have been going suddenly and violently mad all over town. Can SosKaid solve this mystery before time runs out and the Brotherhood descend on Newark, claiming all the all-important FEV sample for themselves? Will dogmeat ever get dry and divest himself of that lingering wet dog smell? And will SosKaid get any helpful answers from this nice-looking bloke with the shotgun? Only time will tell as we pick up the story as SosKaid climbs, staggers, up the steps toward the aforementioned kerfuffle at the trading post. Which is a building. So the trading post is a medium-sized, desolate building on the edge of town, used as a makeshift marketplace for scavengers and traders from other settlements to do business. With a recent streak of cold and storms, business has not been good. Today, the only 2 individuals in the trade post are its quartermaster and a leather-clad, brutish-looking scavenger. So they witness an argument over payment. The scavenger draws a gun, gives the PCs the opportunity to break up the fight. So I'm going to see if this actually happens. This is another way you can approach it. This is possible things that can happen. So when she comes in, are they arguing? I'm going to give it as a very likely because it's in the book, but Mythic has a chance. That's an 85. So yes, they are arguing. So as she comes in, she sees this scavenger and the quartermaster. The scavenger pulls a gun. SosKaid stopped and rocked on the spot slightly. A figure stood at the entrance to the trading post door a flight of steps above her. Rain pounded heavily off his heavy leather trench coat as he stared tensely off to the right over town, shoulders moving up and down in a heavy rhythm as he did. He was gripping something in both hands. Shit. Her stomach went queasy, as a few remaining uninhibited brain cells tugged at her urgently. That's a shotgun. All of a sudden, the man, apparently making a decision, turned 180 degrees on his heel and strode purposefully into the rectangle of light that was the trading post. He raised the gun. Shit. She had to do something. It looks like we can either try and threaten, disarm, or keep peace. So I think she's going to try and disarm SosKaid's going to try and disarm the scavenger. So as she walks in, it's a reasonably small building. She's sort of coming up behind or to the side of both of them, and the fight breaks out. He draws a gun and starts shouting. On second thoughts, fuck that! The man shouted as he strode forward, and SosKaid stumbled up behind him as yet unseen. The quartermaster was frozen behind his counter, one hand reaching under the bar, a recently stilled, smug grin still on his face. Every time it's another excuse. Raiders, taxes, and yet I bring you your shit, regardless, like a fucking puppy dog. The man was visibly shaking with anger, spittle freely flying. SosKaid saw the quartermaster's eyes flick toward her nervously as she took quiet but weaving steps to position herself behind the angry client. Rain pounded the roof and SosKaid felt a sudden surge of confidence. She'd defeated much scarier opponents than this guy, and he clearly wasn't the brightest. She would drop her arms over his shoulders, pinning them to the side. The quartermaster would grab the gun, the man would cower, crying defeat, and she would be rewarded by the grateful citizens of Keshar with all of the information she needed to figure out what the hell was going on around here, and she'd be the hero. Piece of piss, thought SosKaid, suddenly channeling her father's comrade old Jim when he wanted to express that something was particularly easy. And she is going to try and quickly disarm him. So this is a difficulty 3, agility athletics, which is good for us. That's going to be a 12, but it's difficulty 3 and it's not tagged. So I'm going to buy a dice. 12. Oof. Piece of piss, said SosKaid. A second later, the butt of the shotgun broke her nose. Not only did we fail, we got a complication. So I think as he tries to sneak up and tries to disarm him, and as she does that, the complication is that he's going to hit or shoot her instead. He has a bloody shotgun. So she's close enough that she was trying to disarm him. So she's going to do an unarmed strike against her, and he's going to try and hit her with the gun, I guess. SosKaid stumbled backward in surprise, mouth immediately filled with blood. Then her body made to move her out of the way of the blow she'd just met, and amazingly ducked her out of the way of the second. The quartermaster has then come, and he's going to try and... is he going to try lethal force against the scavenger? Don't know, 50-50. Will he try lethal force? Extreme, yes. Things slowed down as the adrenaline of SosKaid's blood started to gain ground on the alcohol. The scavenger spun his shotgun around to point it at her head. "Who the fuck are you?" he shouted, shaking the gun in the air as he did. "Stay out of this!" As he went to turn back around to the quartermaster, SosKaid grabbed the barrel of the shotgun, trying to pull it away from him, her last remembered objective being to disarm. A shot fired, the noise lost in the pounding rain. The quartermaster aims his pistol right at the guy's head. Defense 1. Right at the head. And he misses. The bullet from the quartermaster's revolver must have just missed the scavenger's head by mere centimetres as he jerked slightly forwards, pulled by SosKaid's clumsy disarm attempt. The man staggered into her and she fell back. She was vaguely aware of her perspective shifting 45 degrees and the wind being knocked out of her as she fell back flat on the wooden floorboards. Her normally excellent reflexes apparently having made absolutely no attempt to control or soften her fall. Her ears were ringing and she lay still, slightly bewildered but noting briefly that she was really very calm and there was no pain. Perhaps she had gone back to bed after all, she thought. That'd be nice. He tries to shoot him at the head. He takes aim straight at the head. The guy sort of steps more towards SosKaid and the bullet zips past just where his head was and zings off the back wall. And now we're in combat. Dr. Susan Drake sealed the final ancient yellow envelope and placed it carefully on the small pile on her green-lit desk. It was very late, but she couldn't go to bed yet. She needed more redundancies. This was too important. Was it enough? Sometimes she wished she was a fighter, skilled and brave like Marcus, or agile like that odd skinny vault dweller. But she knew that just wasn't her. Her value was in thinking, in research, in careful analysis and meticulous detail. To risk losing all that was stored in her head to some bloat fly in the wastes was just unthinkable. This was bigger than her. This was humanity. Well, what was left of it. She sighed and picked up an iBot, checking again the scan description on the terminal before hitting enter and watching the little green bar fill. The iBot gave a happy beep, and she slipped the top envelope of the pile into its little hold and clicked it firmly into place. She nodded to herself as she heard the tiny lock engage before sitting it down next to the others and peering out the window. The rain had started to slow, and there was still a few good hours before daylight. She'd better send this one now. The others could wait. They were really just backups anyway, and she hoped they wouldn't be needed. Against all odds, it was that skinny Wastelander that she was putting all her faith in. She hoped, not for the last time, that it was well placed.
Okay, and we are back, and a fight was just in the process of breaking out between a scavenger and the quartermaster there. SosKaid tried to disarm him, failed. The quartermaster tried to shoot him in the head, missed. And now we're going to pick up where we left off. And the first thing we're going to do, I did decide this will be a new scene. So the first thing we're going to do is see if the scene plays out as expected. The expected scene is that SosKaid and the quartermaster get the scavenger under control, either lethally or not, we'll see. And she learns more about the local mystery and can keep going with that. So, let us roll to test the scene. The chaos, we definitely weren't in control in the last scene, so the chaos has gone up to 7. And I'm assuming the storm is still raging outside. So let's see what we get. That's a 1. It definitely does not go as expected. And because it's odd, it's an altered scene.
SosKaid was aware of senses. She concentrated. In her ears there was a wineglass whine, hovering over the sound of shouts. In her eyes a sharp image of the side of the counter, but it kept slowly tipping forward before suddenly righting itself again, only to go ahead and tip once more. There was an ache beginning to form at the back of her skull, but it was diffuse, only the idea of pain. And under her back she felt a kind of arrhythmic rumble. Well, that was odd, she thought.
So let's roll another d10 for the scene adjustment, which is a 7, which means make 2 adjustments. Okay, so one that makes sense to me is add a character. So I think someone maybe heard the gunshot and came in.
SosKaid watched the counter continue its not quite falling loop as a sense of dread started to creep up on her. What was she doing? She thought. And then she saw it. A 10mm was lying innocently on the floor at the very edge of the counter. Well, she thought with an internal chuckle, you'd be in trouble if you'd lost your pistol in the middle of a firefight. Trouble, she realized. Shit, she was in danger. She had to fight. The rumbling feeling on her back was getting stronger, and reality came flooding back as she turned her head toward the entrance of the trading post.
And somebody comes in. First question is basically, is the person that comes in on the side of the scavenger or on the side of the quartermaster? So is it support for the scavenger? I'm going to put that at 50-50 because I don't know. But because the chaos factor is 7, that's a 75% chance. So is the person that comes in support for the scavenger? 8. So that is an extreme yes. So I think actually that means it's 2 people come in.
2 heavy-booted figures stomped into the room, weapons raised, and fanned out on either side of the scavenger. For a moment there was no sound other than the unrelenting pounding of the rain as the 4 figures stood in a motionless standoff. The quartermaster slowly tilted his pistol out of his grip and toward the ceiling in a sign of surrender. No one else moved. The skinny girl on the ground apparently forgotten.
So 2 more scavengers come in. I'm going to assume they're the same stats and weapons. They're his mates. Do they shoot or do they try and defuse the situation? I think I'm going to call it 50-50. Do they shoot? Yes, they do. So they shoot first, ask questions later. Oh, this is now scary.
SosKaid concentrated on the pistol on the floor. She could do it. She could get there. She counted down from 3 in her head and braced to move.
So SosKaid gets to act first.
Now! SosKaid sprang into action by flipping herself over onto her hands and knees and scrambling forward. The second she did, the world exploded. Bits of timber and dust began tinkling all around her, accompanied by the sudden taste and smell of acrid smoke. She couldn't tell if they were firing at her or at each other, but she kept on scrambling, hands and toes now, toward the counter and the pistol resting on the floor. She needed to get it and get behind the cover of the counter if she had any chance at all to tip the balance. Shotgun, she heard herself thinking, somehow more sharply now. Double-barreled, he's out. The pistol was getting closer and no bullets had hit her yet. Just a bit further. She grunted with the effort.
And that is a crit! I cannot believe it.
SosKaid took a split-second risk and rolled over her shoulder before she reached the gun with the aim to scoop it up and get behind cover in one smooth motion. Somehow, it paid off. She felt the grip of the 10mm slot into her hand as she rolled, felt the light change as she moved behind the counter, pulled the slide of the pistol back and sprang to her feet. Her head was spinning, but the pistol was facing the right way. She relinquished control to her instinct, her hindbrain acting on automatic, and she fired.
She's going to take a shot at one of the guys with her hardened, accurate 10mm. Target number 13, tagged. And she's going to go for the head without the extra difficulty using her sniper perk. That is 2 successes, so we get an action point.
She felt time slow again as her trigger released its straining hammer. All of a sudden, SosKaid's conscious brain caught up with her, and she saw that the 3 men were all turning away from her, their aims tracking the quartermaster as he dove for cover behind some metal shelving. All 3 to a man had the unmistakable grimace of adrenaline etched on their faces. SosKaid's pistol kicked.
She hits one of them. So I'm going to use a second bullet and roll an extra die.
It's a well-known mathematical fact that the longer you shake a pool of dice, the better the chance for success is.
Oh, that's not good.
SosKaid's pistol kicked and she saw the scavenger's hand jerk up to a narrow graze that had appeared along his temple. He stared at the hand for a second in shock, and looked up into SosKaid's eyes before pointing his gun at her head in return. Shit, she thought.
That was SosKaid's turn. The quartermaster then goes next with the next initiative, doing burst damage. He misses again. This guy, he's no good. He's not a fighter. He's just a shopkeep.
Before she could react, the room was filled with a spatting sound. Everybody ducked away from the wildly rotating hand that had risen from behind the counter, blind firing its whole clip into the room at large. SosKaid realised she was the only one not ducking for some reason and stood rooted to the spot, trigger of her pistol still in full pull from her last shot.
Now we have the other 3 guys. First, number 1. He's going to continue attacking the quartermaster. So he's going to shoot with the shotgun. It's a miss too. Man, it is just chaos in here.
SosKaid looked around and tried to assess the situation as another pump of adrenaline seemed to straighten out her warm, wavering thoughts just for a moment. There was a hand reaching over the counter and pulling clicks at an empty submachine gun, 10mm SMG, and waving it around wildly. Friend. A man was perched on his elbows on the floor emptying shotgun shells into the front of the counter. Foe, but he needs to reload. Again.
Okay, then the next guy is going to go. The one who SosKaid shot, who's going to shoot back at SosKaid. Okay, first. Are they going to go for shooting, or are they going to go for melee?
There was someone else crouched behind a wooden post in the room. She hadn't noticed him before or seen him fire. Foe, probably. Her, she corrected herself as she looked at the woman's eyes. There was fear there, and anger, directed at SosKaid. Why? She thought for a split second before suddenly...
Are they going to shoot or use melee? 50-50.
Where was the third? Her eyes focused back down her pistol sights as she released the trigger and felt another bullet slide into the chamber from the clip. Ah, she remembered, looking at him, looking at her down his own sights. There he is.
Making it a hit, and it is a random event. Jesus Christ.
Get away from him, you bitch! Came a scream as SosKaid squeezed the trigger half in a daze, still pointed at the man's head. As she did, she felt a body collide with hers, knocking her aim toward a small hole that suddenly appeared in the ceiling. Another shot rang out.
And additionally, there is a PC positive. Okay.
SosKaid stumbled backwards from the impact and looked down at her feet. There was a lot of blood there. She was starting to get dizzy again, her pistol arm hanging suddenly limply from her side. She looked at the woman's pain-contorted face looking back at her, lying in a slow, stickily increasing pool. Oh, she thought.
Whew. So they're shooting at SosKaid, which is difficulty 2. They miss the shot with a 9 and a 13. They needed an 8. So they actually hit their mate. And they're doing 5 vicious spread damage. And the PC positive is that not only do they hit their mate, but SosKaid manages to not get hit at all. So they're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 damage.
"Bridge," said the stunned-looking man. Everything fell suddenly quiet. Even the rain's relentless pounding seemed to fade away to nothing. "Fuck this! We've got to get out of here!" There were tears in his voice. SosKaid fell back hard on her tailbone, completely drained of energy and sense, pistol forgotten and bent awkwardly under her wrist. There was a flurry of movement as the two men picked up their fallen companion, one under the armpits, one on the ankles, and dragged her out the door. Just before they disappeared around the corner, one looked back at SosKaid, pure hate in his streaming eyes, and then they were gone.
This is chaos. They go to shoot SosKaid. She steps back, and they shoot him with the shotgun, severing that major artery there, and he immediately falls over and cracks his head on the side of the thing and is knocked out and bleeding out.
As if regaining consciousness itself, the sound of the rain returned. And SosKaid wrapped her elbows around her knees, staring absently at the trail of blood mingling with tracked-in muddy water. Her stomach churned, and after a few long moments of mild spinning, she began to haphazardly check herself for holes. There was shouting outside, numbly penetrating the sound of rain on tin. "No! No, come back! I can't carry her! Bridge! Bridget! Bridget!" SosKaid looked over to the counter. The quartermaster was lying behind it, unmoving. A shout of despair like a howl floated into the room, followed by the pounding of boots on the metal staircase to the entrance. The scavenger stood in the doorway, breathing heavily, water streaming down his face. He looked straight at SosKaid. "You!" he choked, and raised his gun.
If she doesn't stop the fight now, the quartermaster's probably going to die. So she says, seriously, this is all just a misunderstanding. We don't need to keep shooting. Let's put our guns down and work this out.
"Just wait," said SosKaid. She was surprisingly calm in a numb sort of way. "I'm not your enemy. I was just defending myself. Please, I don't care what you came to steal. Whatever you did is between you and him." She jerked her head to the quartermaster, still lying motionless, and as she did, felt for the cold of the pistol between her palm and the floor behind her. The man was visibly shaking, the physical and metaphorical weight of his gun drooping it slightly towards the floor. "What we did to him?" he spat incredulously. "You have no fucking idea!" Okay, just put the gun down, okay? We don't need to do this."
She needs a 4. Which she absolutely does not get.
"Fuck you, bitch. You killed her." He raised his gun at SosKaid's head and gritted his teeth. "Bridget," she thought he heard him whisper.
She says that, and he immediately now trains his gun on her and says, "Fuck you." But she gets to take a shot first. Which she hits.
There was a clatter as the scavenger's gun skittered across the floor, followed by the rumpling sound of his body falling. But the incessant pounding of the rain swallowed it up a moment later. SosKaid was still sighting down her barrel at the now empty doorway, waiting with the last of her strength to see if anyone else came in. No one else did.
Again in the head, because she is really well trained at this. And she can see that he doesn't really have any protection on his head. And we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is the perfect amount to kill him.
She collapsed from her awkward crab-like position to the ground with a thud and stared at the ceiling as it rotated slightly. Seriously, Mikey, what is in that stuff? She thought through the beginnings of a splitting headache. This was followed by a numb and mildly indifferent moment of self-reflection that was her first thought after she'd just killed someone. Again. No time for that now. She shook the thought from her head, immediately regretted it, got up and walked out of the door toward her bed.
So as soon as he says, fuck you, and he's about to pull the trigger, she squeezes off a shot and hits him right between the eyes, and his legs kind of go out under him and he just falls back. And SosKaid's left sitting there, panting, with the quartermaster sort of crumpled on the floor and wavering. SosKaid waits for a second with the gun trained at the door to see if anyone else comes in, and when it remains quiet, she runs over to try and help the quartermaster. So we're going to see, my expected scene is that the weather settles enough to allow SosKaid to continue the investigation. I'm not sure if I'm going to continue with this whole published thread just yet. I'm sort of itching to go see what Lake Town is all about, perhaps. And just sort of let the narrative build outside of this published thing. I've been enjoying the published adventure. I'm not sure yet. Let's see what the dice tell us to do. So, first thing is test the scene. Does the weather settle enough, or rather test the scene, expected scene, the weather settles enough to allow SosKaid to continue the investigation. Chaos level of 7, we roll a 10. So, yes, it goes as expected.
SosKaid woke with a red eyes flinging open like an unwanted bedroom curtain on a school day. Oh my God, she said incredulously and threw her hands up to protect her exploding skull. She clawed her long, thin fingers into her short hair and massaged her scalp. Oh my God, she repeated and slowly became aware of the happy beeping that had unhappily roused her. She looked down and around for the source of the evil noise. Her pistol was crammed down the front of her vault suit, upside down and covered in mud, she noted with a frown to herself. Stupid. She drew a deep breath and took in her surroundings.
Let's just roll quickly on the weather, which tells us that... Okay, so it says there's no change, so the weather is settled. Let's just say it's drizzling now.
The small room consisted of a simple but well-crafted wooden door, 2 narrow beds yin-yanging the tin walls, each with a small desk opposite it, completing the metaphorical imagery. SosKaid revolved herself and sat down on the edge of the cot, leaning heavily on her knees. She was in Hawthorne's bed, and the beeping was coming from underneath her heavy coat, which had been laid out neatly on her own. Infamous indeed, she muttered to herself and leant over to lift up the coat. Underneath it lay her discarded Pip-Boy. On it there was a little figure tapping his watch and foot in an impatient rhythm with a graphic of a calendar saying 13 days left.
There are 13 days remaining. So, now that the weather has settled down a bit, we're going to go to the town square and we're going to see what else is happening in the published adventure for that there, but we're also going to be open to the idea that something else comes up. So, SosKaid gets up in the morning, the weather's settled down, she decides to go into the town square, notices out the window that perhaps there's a bit of movement, people are moving around, so she's going to go in there. and see who she can talk to.
The mud was thick as ever on the tank floor, but there was a feeble sense of sunlight threatening to break through the clouds. Her head was pounding, and all she wanted to do was go back to bed, but her father had told her, if you're responsible enough to drink too much, you're responsible enough to get on with it the next day.
So it says here, with the arrival of winter, okay, I'm not sure it's winter, the town square today is less busy. So let's say with the weather, the town square is less busy than usual, but there are several recognisable faces.
Up in the marketplace, there was an unfamiliar feeling in the air. People were sitting on the edges of walkways, chatting and generally swinging their legs in an absent-minded childlike fashion. A few caught her eye and gave her a knowing smile or a grimace. "How's the head?" Someone she didn't recognise shouted, and she gave them an awkward smile in return. Still more people leaned against walls, drinking from steaming mugs that were releasing a rich and wafting smell into the air. Wow, she thought. She'd never had a particular desire for coffee before, but now she realised that she'd never wanted anything more in her life.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is speak to one of the locals.
As if manifested by that thought, a mug appeared in front of her. Slightly fuzzily, SosKaid followed the outstretched arm up into the smiling face of the mayor. "Thought you might need one of these," said Jessie with a knowing wink. "Thank you," SosKaid muttered and took the steaming mug. Then she realised what was different. "You're all not working." "'S right," said Jessie, hands on hips and chin high as she surveyed her town and her people. "Would you believe I have to enforce it? Otherwise, they'd just keep going and going." SosKaid took in the faces around her. They were smiling. They seemed happy, contented. "We're proud of what we've built here, and we worked hard for it. Together." SosKaid nodded and felt a brief but intense feeling of loss. "And there are forces out there who would take it all away from us. Forces bigger than even those bastard raiders bickering with one another." SosKaid flinched and then was hit with a realization. She turned to the mayor with a gasp. "The quartermaster? Jared? He's okay. Resting up in the medical ward. Doc says he should make a full recovery." SosKaid let out the recently gasped air in a lump. "Okay," she said, nodding. "I managed to get everything cleaned up first before anyone else got up." SosKaid noticed a crease of worry appear on the mayor's forehead. "They really needed the day off, you see," she said, half to herself. I'd like to go see him," said SosKaid, understanding. Jessie nodded. "But I think I need another coffee first."
Let's see, does SosKaid recognise anyone? We could have merchant. Who was the merchant here? Mikey? Does SosKaid recognise anyone in the town square? I'm going to say it's unlikely, but she does. So I think the most thing is she recognises Mikey.
SosKaid couldn't help but smile as the ghoul merchant turned to her with a knowing glint in his eye, proffering a coffee pot. "I hear you had a big one." "Yeah, something like that," she said as she held her cup out under the flow of thick black caffeinated goodness. "Thanks," she said and cupped her other hand around it for warmth. Carefully blowing off a few errant wisps of rich-smelling steam, she looked up through her fringe. It was starting to get a bit long. Should have to cut it again. Her eyes refocused and she saw the ghoul holding up a well-tarnished brass-plated hip flask. "Want me to, make it a Mikey?" he said, proffering the flask with a grin. "Jesus Christ, no," SosKaid replied with an involuntary chuckle. "Hey," Mikey went on, face changing suddenly to a more serious expression. "Come with me, eh? I've got something for you. Came in the night. Was hoping I'd see you before I, head off for the day." "For me?" she said, and hurriedly followed the already walking ghoul towards the top story of the tank's central building.
Mikey, she comes up to Mikey and she says, "Hey, do you have any news? Anything you can tell me, either about this murder or anything else that's going on with Newark? Do you have any news?" Now, I think actually this is pretty likely because he's a merchant. You know, he knows a lot of stuff. So that's 85, and we get a 33, which is a random event. And that random event is current context. Okay, so the current context is Let's look on our threads. About the Keshar mystery, makes sense. And then we have and about Newark. Ooh, okay.
SosKaid climbed through the window and into the mostly deserted interior building. Mikey was walking quickly and determinedly without looking back until he reached the front counter of his bar-cum workshop. As he did, SosKaid noticed him pick something up hurriedly off the counter and stuff it into his faded but fancy many-pocketed jacket. He turned to face her and pulled something else from a different pocket. "So," he said, as a breath.
There's an event that happens. It involves the Keshar mystery, and Newark is involved somehow. Now, maybe we go completely off book then, if we get into Newark. Let's see what the meanings table says to us. So we get a stop and personal. Okay. I think this means for personal reasons, which we'll find out what they are in a second, that SosKaid is going to pause her investigation in Keshar because of something happening in Newark. So what is happening in Newark then? Observe, cooperation. Okay. So I think what happens is he says, "Hey, look, actually, I have a note for you."
SosKaid felt a little thrill of anticipation as she took the ancient yellowed envelope. It crinkled slightly in her hand. Her breath caught as she forced herself to turn it over. Written at the top of whatever address had previously been there in a firm and confident but unfamiliar hand was written, "Intended for the vault suit-clad, thin of stature, young woman known as SosKaid, a lone wanderer." SosKaid felt her rapidly beating heart sink before it suddenly rose into her throat. She wiped her eye quickly and internally scolded herself for stupid girlish hopefulness. "How did this—" she started, not giving away the quaver in her voice. Mikey waved another folded sheet in answer. "When my boys on night duty picked this up, they brought it straight to me. Couldn't mistake the addressee." SosKaid lifted the already unstuck corner of the envelope's flap and raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, sorry about that. Couldn't help myself." SosKaid smiled, despite herself. Mikey's didn't return it, however. He looked uncharacteristically grave. Well, you know what I mean. "Good thing it was me that picked it up, though, eh? I think you'll agree," said Mikey with a worried-looking nod towards the envelope. SosKaid slid out the crinkling paper from its recycled housing and unfolded it with barely a shake of the hand. She began to read. I wonder if this is a message from the NCR, from Doctor. Is the message from Dr. What was her name? Susan? Dr. Susan Drake? Oh, extreme yes. Okay. So here's what's happened. Drake has managed to get a message to Keshar for the Wastelander, for SosKaid, saying that she should observe her cooperation with the Brotherhood of Steel. Maybe it's not going to be in everyone's best interest that SosKaid works with them. They do have similar goals. Okay, so what Susan Drake says is you have to cooperate with them in order to get in there and get the FEV, but then they can't be allowed to get hold of the FEV because there's some kind of plot to use it, maybe in an opposite way, maybe to use it as some kind of a weapon to wipe out non-humans. Ooh, that's rough. SosKaid lay in Hawthorne's bunk, one wrist on her forehead, the other stretched out in the air holding Drake's note, rereading it for the 100th time. She tried to identify her feelings. There was a dull feeling of dread in the pit of her stomach. Well, that was always there. Anger? Betrayal? Why? She hadn't been betrayed. Why should she care? It was just a whole group of people with hopes and dreams of good and evil like everyone else. Kids, families, couples. She caught a flash of Daisy speared to the kitchen wall and promptly threw up. Yuck, she said to herself, and swore, also for the 100th time, that she would never drink again. She had to get moving, do something, figure out what was going on. If she lay here feeling sorry for herself any longer, she might just lose the plot. She pulled out the sticky-less post-it note from when she'd first met the mayor and taken on the case. She thought to herself, who do I think I am? She looked at the last uncrossed scrawl in her own barely legible handwriting. The medical centre, ? Well, nothing else for it, she said to herself with a groan, swung her legs out over the cot and stood up with only the hint of a wobble. Right then.
Okay. So the only place we haven't been is the clinic. So I think we're going there. She goes to the last place she hasn't been to yet, which is the clinic. And when the PCs enter the clinic, read the following.
The clinic's sterile waiting room was flanked by a door on one side and a long hallway leading to 4 curtained rooms on the other. There were also cots laid out in an organised fashion, atop a few of which lay motionless bodies. It was eerily quiet. Hello? Called SosKaid into the still space. The call probably not loud enough to be effective in its purpose.
So SosKaid walks in sort of cautiously. It does appear to be a working clinic, so she's not too worried about anything just yet. But then again, she did just nearly get killed in the trade post. So she is cautious, and she goes up to the front desk to see if there's any indication of if anyone's around.
Hello? She called again, only slightly louder. No answer. She tiptoed towards the empty admin desk, peering over its edge and surreptitiously lifting the corners of a few files that lay there.
And atop the desk are several files that suggest there's an alarming number of new cases involving town residents having trouble with memory and sudden bursts of irrational behaviour.
SosKaid let out a low whistle through her teeth, all thoughts of subtlety out the window, as she picked up the large stack of files and started flicking through them, large chunks at a time. The mayor had really undersold how bad the problem was getting in their initial meeting.
I think in our version of this story, it's not because of the Institute, which is what this adventure is supposed to be about. I think in our version of the story, I think there's a plot, and this is why the NCR and the Brotherhood want a sample of the FEV. But I think there's a plot to develop sort of a watered down version of the FEV. I believe that what they had to do to turn real super mutants with the FEV is dip them in vats of the stuff. And the Master himself became like he was because he fell in a vat and was exposed for way longer than anyone should be. So I think there's a plot with Wright to produce and develop a diluted version of the FEV that could be distributed quietly through the water systems to slowly turn people into super mutants without causing alarm and without having to go and capture people and dip them in these vats. And I don't think they know if it's going to work yet. I think they've done some testing. Maybe the sister, Adrienne, was one of the earlier test subjects, and they're working out the dosage. And I think that they are testing it on Keshar now, because they have a water supply, and in fact, getting the FEV into their water reserves would be a wonderful way to spread it through the area, because this is a hub for water. So I think that's what the plot is. Interesting. And maybe one of the side effects is because they're ghouls and they're already radiated, maybe they're not turning into super mutants slowly, but rather it's just fucking with their heads. And so I think that's what's going on.
All presenting with stomach cramps and mild nausea, followed by unconsciousness. Upon waking a short time later, apparent and nearly complete memory loss. SosKaid jumped at the unfamiliar voice and she spun around, freezing in decision paralysis if she should draw her pistol or a knife. Her head was so foggy. She relaxed as she saw the friendly but frowning face of a mature woman in a white coat holding a clipboard to her chest. "The lone wanderer, I presume?" it said. SosKaid looked guiltily at the ground and mumbled, "Sorry, I was looking for—" "May I?" the woman said, sounding surprisingly more curious than angry. She extended a gloved hand and SosKaid deposited the document she was holding into it. "Come with me," she said, and turned on her heel before walking smartly up the short corridor and into a small office at the end. The desk within contained a meaningful mess of files, folders, and bits of paper. SosKaid noticed a small eyebot with a yellowing envelope sat on the desk's edge.
44. We have a random event. Involving Keshar mystery and the NCR. What's the nature of this event? Befriend? Building. So I think we're going to befriend someone in the building who has ties to the NCR.
"Sit, why don't you?" She obeyed, wondering why she was feeling like a kicked puppy. SosKaid sat as the doctor leant back in her chair and crossed one slender leg over the other. "Now," said the woman in the white coat, "tell me about Joseph."
She suspects that it's something to do with the water source. I mean, it's not necessarily the first leap that you would go to. They have purified water there. But the fact that it's so widespread, she was narrowing down what is something that everybody comes in contact with. And the one common thing that everybody in town comes in contact with is their main water source.
SosKaid considered the woman before her. She had a kind face and intelligent eyes, crinkling at the edges. Her hair was dark and her skin quite pale, but it suited her. There was an air of confidence about her that made SosKaid want to sit up straighter in her chair and also cross her leg too, but she stopped herself, feeling like an idiot. The doctor raised an eyebrow and SosKaid dropped her gaze awkwardly, catching a small ankle tattoo only partially covered by the woman's tight calf jeans as she did. A roaring bear with two heads under a red star. "Right," said SosKaid, taking a breath, and she told her everything.
So she has a tattoo, and I think from memory, the insignia on the NCR flag is that of I think it's a bear, but SosKaid recognises it.
Dr. Shannon Arlo put down her clipboard and uncrossed her legs. She'd only taken a note or two for the eternity that it felt like SosKaid had been speaking. There was a long silence, and the cathode ray wine from the doctor's terminal seemed to slowly take over the small space. SosKaid felt her face start to grow hot until eventually Dr. Arlo smiled. "You've put a lot of faith in me right now, Wanderer." SosKaid squirmed a little in her chair. Had she been naive and foolish again? But no, this whole situation wasn't even her problem, was it? Why was she feeling so responsible and loyal to a small town mayor she'd only just met? I recognize your tattoo," blurted out SosKaid by way of covering her doubts. The doctor's hand twitched toward her newly crossed ankle for a moment and seemed to be considering something. "Well, that's interesting," she said. Order, progress, democracy. These are the words that would one day spread through the west of the North American wasteland. A faction would one day emerge in the rubble of the wastes in the diverse backgrounds of the denizens of Vault 15. This faction would slowly form, then rise, then stand. Stand for justice and personal liberty, and the rule of law. They would become a republic and a central feature to the attempted reclamation of civilization. The new California Republic. The NCR. A movement of the ideals of the old world. But they wouldn't have it easy. Over the century to come, they would face threats from within and from without. Competing for control over the region with New Reno, from the marauding armies of Caesar's Legion in the Mojave, and ultimately from the nuclear destruction at its birthplace, a once humble village known as Shady Sands. Order, progress, democracy. But in our story, all of that is yet to come. And while our erstwhile narrator, "Hi, I'm PJ," constantly refers to the NCR, it is still just the inkling of a yet unnamed idea in the heads and hearts of ordinary people, just trying to survive and carve out their place in this horrifically unforgiving world. For justice, for personal liberty, and for the rule of law.
How to think about it, and I think basically it's that so this doctor does know Susan. I think that makes more sense. I think the NCR have a bit of a network collecting information, and they have shared but different goals to the Brotherhood. So both want to neutralize the FEV, obviously, but the Brotherhood also want to use the FEV to reverse it so that they can wipe out non-humans. And so what the doctor tells us is that it's important, like you have to work with the Brotherhood, but there's no way they're going to let you go free afterwards. You know too much.
I hope you appreciate just how important a piece you've somehow become in this whole mess, said Shannon frankly, leaning forward, elbows on knees in front of SosKaid. They'd been talking for hours and it was well into the dark of early morning. We need that sample and a copy of the formula. We need it so that we can try and reverse engineer and synthesize a substance that can neutralize its effects. If indeed this sickness is being intentionally spread, then it's much likely much bigger than just Keshar and Newark. And if it is in this facility that you spoke of, or more likely locked in Newark itself, then we will need the Brotherhood's help to get in there. Help that currently only you have access to. SosKaid made to disagree, and for the 100th time that evening proved to the doctor that she wasn't capable, but the doctor silenced her with the wave of her hand. There is something else. The Brotherhood. They can't be allowed to get their hands on it themselves. Shannon paused and let the unspoken words sink in. And it seems like you may have gotten close to some of them, she continued. SosKaid felt a hollowing feeling as she was handed the letter Shannon had been holding. It had Dr. Susan Drake's now familiar handwriting on it, outlining what she suspected the Brotherhood's plans for the FEV might be. SosKaid took a sharp intake of breath and then noticed a small sketch on an extra piece of map folded within. The sketch was accompanied with some coordinates.
Okay, so it also says that the doctors uncovered a signal, or rather the NCR have uncovered a signal transmitting to a hidden device in a specific coordinates in the wilderness nearby.
I personally helped set up the initial water table that got Keshar pumping in the first place, said the doctor. She pulled out a pre-war hydrogeological map entitled Umpqua Basin. The main underground feed comes from here. She pointed to a spot just southeast of Keshar, which is where we set up the initial draw. SosKaid nodded, starting to feel a prickling sensation of understanding. She spun Drake's sketch on the table towards her and double-checked the coordinates. Referencing them to a point on the map further away from town, she traced her finger back along a very thin line. It wound its way down the crinkling paper and intersected with the main water source close to Keshar. The pieces suddenly fell into place in SosKaid's head. "It's in the water," she whispered. "Exactly," said Shannon, standing and beginning to pace the small room. "I've already sent word to Jesse to cut off the water supply and start distributing our oldest stockpile of bottled water to the citizens." SosKaid nodded and then frowned. "So, the fact that Dr. Drake came up with those exact coordinates like you somehow means that there is something there," said Shannon, finishing the sentence.
She says, if there's a way to save the town, then it may have something to do with discovering the signal.
"Our oldest backup water stocks won't last long. We need to get up there and cut off whatever is distributing this stuff into the water. Then you need to get to this gala place and go in with the Brotherhood. But you have to get out without them, by whatever means necessary." At that moment, the slightly wonky electronic doorbell sounded with a wee-wah-woo, and the doctor stood. "Just a moment," she said, and promptly left the room.
Okay. So I think that's where we're at. So we say, okay, we still have a little bit of time. We're going to go and see if we can find this device and figure out what it's doing and if it might be the key to A, figuring out who is doing this. Is it the Brotherhood or is it right? It's got to be right.
SosKaid sat back and let out an exasperated breath. She didn't know how to feel. On one hand, it was a relief to know that all of her actions so far had apparently been important, had been for something. But she wasn't capable of saving the Wasteland. She wasn't capable of saving anyone. Not Aya, not Marcus or Ramirez. She was barely capable of saving herself. She choked on the image of the dying boy in the facility, pleading in his eyes. "You have to tell them," he had said, "or no one will be able to stop the FEV." Maybe it was safer in the Brotherhood's hands. She didn't really know anything about Shannon or Susan Drake or whatever network they were building other than a feeling of trust towards them, but her feelings seemed to always be getting her in trouble. SosKaid was suddenly aware of a muffled sort of grumbling sound coming from the waiting room, and then a distinct, "Calm down, help me get him over here and tie him down." She listened for a moment and then stood up suddenly, nearly knocking over her chair with the back of her knees as she did. Something was wrong, she thought, and walked warily but swiftly out of the door and toward the waiting room, hand instinctively resting on the butt of her pistol as she did.
When the PCs leave the room, they return to the waiting room, and it's no longer empty when she returns. There's several townsfolk standing there between you and the door.
SosKaid walked into the waiting room. Something felt wrong. Dr. Ala was strapping down a vaguely struggling ghoul to one of the triage cots lined up against the wall. Another figure was lying motionless on the floor. "Here, hold this please, Jessie," said the doctor, reaching out her hand behind her without looking. There was an eerie silence, and the doctor's hand hung there for a moment. Something was wrong. "Jessie," the doctor said again.
Let's keep reading. Jessie Pettigrew is there, and she steps forward, speaks in a strange, whispering voice.
"I don't know you," said Jessie in a strange, whispering voice. "I don't know you," she repeated, turning to SosKaid. "I don't know." SosKaid froze, and for a second nothing moved. Nothing other than the 10mm pistol that was wavering slightly in front of her face before a pair of reddening eyes. She heard her heartbeat. Once. Twice. And then all hell broke loose. Thank you for joining me today for another chapter of A Wasteland Story. It is my honour to continue this crazy labour of love into a brand new year, and I want to thank each and every one of you here for your enthusiasm, commitment, and patience as we work our way towards this final act of the first season of this show. This story, these characters, this whole mutated thing is just so important to me. And although things have slowed down a little on the production side with work commitments and of course the other projects that I keep somehow coming up with and committing to, for better or worse, I absolutely treasure and adore every minute I get to contribute to creating a Wasteland Story. And I'm so glad that there are people like you out there listening and following along. If you are into solo role-playing but somehow are still unaware that I have a whole other show, you should definitely go and check out the Solo Roleplayers podcast, on which I have it on reasonably good authority to say there just might be something featuring some pretty significant Fallout news in the not-too-distant future. This month, in fact. Thank you as well, as always, to the usual musical suspects whom you can read all about in the show notes. Stay tuned for what's to come, and I'll catch you next time when we return for another episode of A Wasteland Story. And until then, if you find yourself beginning to turn green, make sure to drink lots of fluids, tie yourself to a chair, and get a good night's sleep. Bye!